Good afternoon and welcome to Clear Lake in Review. My guests today are Percy Cronk, Alma Rothgeber, and Ellen Pearson, and today's program is brought to you with the best wishes of Fall Electric in Clear Lake. I'd like to start the program this afternoon by having each of you tell us just a little bit about yourself, how long you've lived in Clear Lake, and what kind of a profession you had during your life in Clear Lake. Okay? How about you, Alma?
Well, we came here in 1917. My husband bought the Clear Lake Star, and, we in the Clear Lake Star at that time was sort of in the alley in a small building, and then a few years later my husband moved it uptown.
I see. Was it a family operation when you owned the newspaper?
Yes, my husband owned it.
I see. How about you, Percy?
Well, I've been here ever since I was born. And of course, that's not very long ago. But, that's much about me. I carried mail for 40-some years, and then I got a coronary and retired. Didn't want to, but I did anyway. That's about all.
And how about you, Ellen?
I lived here in Clear Lake since 1914, and we had my husband worked in the hardware store, and then after a few years he bought the hardware store, and that's what we've been doing.
I think I'm going to ask Percy to tell us a little bit about some of the really old history of Clear Lake. The three of you have many experiences from your lifetime in Clear Lake, but I think Percy has some information about when his father, Asa B. Cronk, came to Clear Lake back in the 1800s. And why don't you tell us about that?
Well, this was written by my dad for a commercial club meeting one night. I was in the 20s or the 30s sometime, I can't remember, but this is about my dad's folks, not mine. My parents came here in 1866. New Richmond, Wisconsin had the first post office. The next post office was in Black Brook, west from Chadwick's Corner, then the old mill on the Hinman Place, and then to Black Brook near the community hall, and then to Clear Lake. And the first mill was built by Israel Graves in 1875. In 1877, it was sold to Jones and Glover. In 1881, it was taken over by the John E. Glover Company, and the railroad was built in 1875, and trains were run over it once a week. The first child was born June the 9th, 1875, to Charlie Henry Whitcomb. And the first marriage was January the 19th, 1876, with John Gates and Alice Scoville. And then Frank Brown started the first meat market in 1876. And Al Briggs started the first blacksmith shop in 1876. During the first of 1876, a building was erected by public subscription and was used for religious worship and public instruction. There was a misunderstanding amongst those who subscribed, and each man's subscription was returned, and the building was sold to the school district. And Mrs. Clara Southmaid taught the first school, which was a select school, rather classy to have a private school. Charlie Earle was the first public teacher to teach here. Mrs. D.A. Church moved here in 1879. She started teaching in 1880 and taught for 7 years. At that time, there was 320 pupils enrolled. The least that Mrs. Church had at any one time was 58, and the attendance ran from 70 to 80 pupils. The last year, she had 118, and they gave her an assistant. And Mary Cavanaugh taught here in 1880, and Mrs. Church only lost 1 day in the 7 years on account of a bad blizzard. We have some of her pupils here tonight. Walt Nash, Oakley West, Carl and Thor Nelson, Willie and Bert Schultz, Fred Booth, Joe Stout, Abel Black, and Elwin Church and Bert Starkweather. And Lena Lewis Wilson had won a $1,000 prize for writing a slogan for the Industrial Chamber of Commerce. Her slogan was, "The richest child is poor without musical training." Excuse me. The teachers at that time received from $30 to $40 per month, and 4 teachers were the most that was employed at one time. Some very successful men went to school here in the early days. At this time, there are at least 1,200 people living here. Work was plentiful and wages were good. How about progress on that score? In 1878, the town was divided, and Clear Lake was set off. On April 1878, the first town election took place. Charlie Sawyer was the first town chairman. Charlie Graves was the first town clerk. And Seymour Cartwright started the first livery barn during the summer of 1878. In 1879, the Methodists began the erection of a church. The Congregational also built a church in 1879. Reverend C.W. Hinman was the first missionary to work in this territory. The first newspaper was started in 1884 and was printed November the 7th, 1884. And on September the 9th, 1884, Clear Lake was visited by a cyclone and 3 people were killed. Mrs. Pete Burdick and Will Cavanaugh and A.H. Saunders. Within a year, you would hardly know there had been one. That's wrong. In 1885, the cash value of agriculture and farm products in Polk County was estimated at $1 million, while today our creamery alone produces over half of that amount. And my dad was also one of the charter members of the Methodist Church. And that's about the size of it.
And you said that was prepared by your father.
By my father, but it was his folks that come up here in 1866.
I see. Percy mentioned the newspaper. Can you tell us just what it was like to run a newspaper when your family started the paper, Alma?
Well, when we came here, it was all set up. The print was all set up by hand, each individual letter. But I never learned to type. And then after we'd been here a year or two, we bought the linotype. And that's a very wonderful machine.
Right.
But I hear now they don't use it anymore.
Now it's computers.
Now it's computers.
All right. What were some of the stories that you can remember as being big stories that were reported in the newspaper when you owned it? What were some of the important things that happened then?
Well, I can't really remember anything special.
Yeah. Did you do a lot of coverage about students in the school here in Clear Lake?
No, they didn't do so much of that.
I see.
Years ago. The older people were more important than the youngsters.
I see. Ellen, what was it like for your family to run a hardware store? How did you get started, and what did you do?
We got started after he'd been working there several years, and then we settled down, and we lived there close by, and I said we didn't have even electric lights in our homes at that time. So we used gas lamps and kerosene lamps, and also the water proposition. We didn't have water in our homes. That's quite a few years ago. And we'd gather around the pump in the neighborhood. Several people would come, and there's where we gossiped. And then they had open wells at that time, so we pulled up water with a bucket also. So it was quite different than it is now.
Kind of an interesting spot for people to meet each other.
To live at that time.
Right.
It was 61 years ago.
I see. What were some of the things you had in your store then that we don't have now?
We had old-fashioned cook stoves, and then they had machinery at that time, and they sold nails there. There wasn't no nails around in what you call in the lumber yard, so they had all kinds of stuff. Everything was mixed with everything.
I did a program with Mr. Nielsen, who also had a store, and he said it was so different because you bought in bulk.
And then we burnt out and then it was, we had to start kind of all over again, and we had a fire sale, so it was quite an interesting time at that time.
When was that?
Oh, I can't just remember the date. I said that.
What did you have in the way of a fire department? Say if you did have a fire back then.
Yes, we had a fire department at that time.
What did they have to fight a fire with?
Well, something, hoses like they do now, or something like that, I guess. So I can.
Percy, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in Clear Lake in your lifetime?
Well, when I was a kid, they didn't hardly anybody have a car. But we got one, I think I was 7, 8 years old. Ed Sharon got one, and Harley Yates and my dad. Ed had just a tiller on his, and my dad and Harley Yates had a steering wheel. That thing, 2-cylinder engine, you cranked it from behind, and smooth tires, and you just put her on blocks in the wintertime. Well, you can say pretty much of everything changed, and I'm just a young guy.
You're one of the younger members of town, right? Alma, what have you seen in the way of changes in your lifetime here? What were some of the things that you took for granted when you were a young person that's changed now?
Well, of course, I was 25 when I came here, so I can't remember way back. Most of these folks can. But there were a lot of changes. We used to have chautauquas. Well, it was just entertainment. We had those in the summertime. It was, they were programs.
I see. Percy's laughing at me because I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, they had them when I was a kid.
Chautauquas?
Chautauquas.
I see.
Now, here's something that would probably interest my dad and Dave Palmer were the first mail carriers in Clear Lake, and they got appointed April the 5th, 1904. And that was just a little while before I was born. And here's Neil Nelson's dad, Carl, was appointed his sub. So you can see how long ago they were. And that's the first 2 routes out of Clear Lake.
How many people did you serve when you were delivering mail?
Oh, when we first started, we had horses, and there was 20-some miles, and I can't remember how many people, but when I ended, I think I had 72 miles. Quite a lot of people.
Ellen, what kind of changes have you seen in the business community? You were one of the merchants on Main Street in Clear Lake, and what kind of growth did you see in your business since then?
I have seen a lot of growth. It has changed a lot since we were in business, and we.
What did you enjoy most about your life in business in Clear Lake?
Well,
a lot of interesting people when you have somebody like Percy delivering your mail.
We met a lot of interesting people. I used to go down to the store, and I knew all the farmers around here then. Now I don't know anyone that comes into town, so it's changed quite a bit. I said that's.
Alma, what are you looking forward to the most with the Centennial?
Well, I've always been interested in putting on our old-time programs every summer. I've always taken an interest in that. But I think it's all wonderful. Clear Lake has been a closely knit community, and we've all been friendly, and it was all like one big family. It always has been. We went to the different churches to their entertainments. There was never any division about churches. And I always thought that was a wonderful thing.
Kind of the backbone of any community.
Yes, it is.
Right. I want to ask Percy a question. If you had a choice now, was there anything different you would have done in your life in Clear Lake?
Well, that's an awful stupid question because I've done a lot of things that I wouldn't do now.
Or things you would do that you didn't?
Yeah, there's things I would do that I didn't do. Yeah, but then everybody makes mistakes.
Or they do things right.
But you see, I hope they all come to their basket social. That's our 51st wedding anniversary, too.
It is 61st. 51st wedding anniversary. That's a long time. That's a long time of marriage.
Yeah, well, she never kicked me out, and I wouldn't dare to kick her out, so what else you going to do?
Right. Well, thank you very much for being my guest today.
I hope you can understand it.
I sure can. Percy Cronk, Alma Rothgeber, and Ellen Pearson. 3 people from Clear Lake who I've enjoyed talking to on Clear Lake in Review today, and my thanks to you for being my guests. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Holmes of Clear Lake will be celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary this Sunday afternoon. There's going to be an open house at the Cletus Holmes residence in Clear Lake from 2 to 5 Sunday afternoon, and all friends and relatives are invited to attend. This has been Clear Lake in Review, with today's program being brought to you by Fall Electric in Clear Lake.